Hi, and welcome to the 8th episode of the 365 Days of Compassion videos, within which we're taking a look at some of the core concepts and a few of the exercises from Compassionate Mind Training, or CMT. I'm Chris. I'm not an expert, I'm not a trained professional. I'm sharing my experience from developing CMT and using that as part of compassion-focused therapy. My hope is that these videos could either inspire you to perhaps look into CMT, CFT, or perhaps are helping you as you're undertaking those. So, having considered the core concepts of the compassionate mind in the earlier episodes and some of the exercises which I found useful, I thought it might be worthwhile taking a little bit of time in this episode to consider what might impact deepening compassion or doing the compassionate mind exercises. Now, I don't know, perhaps watching these videos it appears straightforward and you may not envisage problems, or you may not even thought about the problems. I probably didn't think about that when I was starting out, and looking back I can see some things which have tripped me up or were catching me out. Compassion in the exercises. So within compassionate mind, these are kind of referred to as fears and barriers. So fear is where we are scared, so that could be frightened of our emotions, perhaps fearful of what might happen if we demonstrate more compassion. Barriers can be things that actually get in our way, so this could be perhaps time constraints to do the compassionate mind exercises, for example. We can also face emotional barriers, and these are highly likely given that compassionate mind is part of working with our emotions. So anger and sadness can obviously be part of that. We're trying to build a sensitivity to distress, and that's challenging, although I think ultimately enriching. So additionally, life events can play a part. So some people could actually find it hard to imagine what compassion is or what compassion is like, and it can also bring to mind traumatic events. And I think it's for that reason that if you think that could be happening or that could be the case if you try to undertake this, it's really important to have that professional help and support and guidance to help you through that. I think also intense self-criticism, rumination can be a barrier, and they can act as a resistance. This is where our threat and drive systems are kind of in full mode, and that can make it difficult to be particularly self-compassionate, I think. I think that's particularly true within depression. We can also consider that self-compassion and as part of a kind of self-care base is selfish, and I'd argue that it's not. I guess the definition of selfish is not caring about others, whereas what we're actually trying to foster here is a caring focus on your own well-being, so that actually you're at your best and able to help others. So I'd argue that it certainly isn't selfish. The changes that compassionate mind development and training bring will take time and effort. I think it helps to take these things slowly and gradually. In the Compassionate Mind Workbook by Chris and Elaine Beaumont, they have this idea of a ladder where varying parts of compassionate mind training exercises are at different steps in that ladder. So for example, the breathing exercise, the soothing rhythm breathing exercise, perhaps we're on the lower rungs, and then imagery a little bit higher up, and perhaps compassionate writing higher still. And the idea with doing that ladder is that it's okay to move up and down it as you need to. I think that's quite a nice little kind of metaphor. Because at the end of the day, you are unique, and how you develop these exercises, and I've not covered all of the exercises in these videos. There may be some that you find more helpful than I have, or you may not find that writing works for you. This is for you, and you go at your own pace. I think one of the big things around compassion, which is why it's worth talking about the definition, as we did in the start of these videos, is that compassion can be seen as perhaps weak or vulnerable. Now, to an extent, I would agree with the word vulnerable, but I mean that in a powerful sense. I think vulnerability is a powerful word, and I think there is a strength and perhaps an encouragement that compassion brings to that vulnerability. So it's the ability to be vulnerable. And therefore I would argue that it isn't weak. You are facing up to strong emotions, working with distress, perhaps things that you used to avoid. I'd argue that is the total opposite of weak. I would argue that that's actually requires the compassionate courage that we've kind of touched upon in some of the previous episodes. I think it can also be seen as being easy on yourself. Now, compassion absolutely maintains responsibility for actions and behaviours, but it brings with it an understanding and a wisdom to perhaps know what is right for us. So sometimes a challenging situation or distress can be too much, and actually there's nothing wrong then with stepping back and taking some time out. You're not being easy upon yourself, you're doing what is right for you at that point. And I think that's the key difference, because it can be sometimes very easy just to avoid doing something. But having kind of compassionate wisdom to know that it's right to avoid that, or actually I'm avoiding this because reasons that aren't helpful, that allows you to do those things. And I think that's a key message that sometimes get lost, and I think people can therefore think that you're being easy upon yourself, or actually not, you're being wise to yourself. Now you will not, or you may not experience all of these barriers and fears. I certainly didn't experience all of them, but I think it's very useful to understand those alongside the exercises. The absolute key thing here is to be gentle and encouraging yourself as you go along. There isn't an end result, there isn't a kind of a compassionate medal at the end of compassionate mind training. I think you'll have moments when you realise that actually this is the compassionate mind training or some of the exercises have helped. These can be very small moments, and the one thing that I would absolutely highly recommend is that when you recognise that something like that's happened, that you take a moment to celebrate and congratulate yourself, because that's all part of that encouragement piece. Now, one additional idea which I'm just going to mention, which I think is a brilliant idea, and again it's from the Compassionate Mind Workbook by Chris Irons and Elaine Beaumont. And there are going to be times when things are challenging, or indeed, things get too much. And they have a suggestion of something called a compassionate setback plan. So this is something you do, sit down, and it's a kind of document, so you can write this in your journal or however you're going to record it. And it's just something that says what might cause you a setback, and this obviously could be personal to you. How would your compassionate self see that setback? What might inform you that setback is happening, or you're starting to struggle? And how can your compassionate self help prepare and then work through that? I think this is a great tool because you write and develop it when things are okay or good, and then it's a really useful tool to be able to use when things are difficult and you may not be thinking as clearly, and it really brings your compassionate self to the fore, and it's personal to you and you've written it, so it's not some advice from someone else, it's personal to you. Now, I think that's a great tool. I highly recommend having a setback plan stored away. It's been a very helpful tool to me to use. And then I'm just going to leave you with one last thought in this episode, and this time it's a thought or a quote from Dr Mary Welford. And I think this is a great question to perhaps keep in mind each day, and I think in some ways this helps to address some of the fears and blocks that you might experience. And so the question is simply this: what can I do for myself today that will make tomorrow a better day? I'm going to leave you with that thought. Thanks for watching. Take care.